formal name is Robert Lee Millard. Born in Richland, Michigan, which is in the northern part of the state, in 1927, month of November.
The northern part of the state?
Yes.
Near Bel Air, Charlevoix?
A little town called West Branch, which no one ever heard of.
Okay, so you were born near West Branch.
That's right.
Your family was from West Branch?
Yes.
What was your father's name?
Elburn Millard.
And your mother was?
Rosamond Laporte.
Rosamond Laporte Millard.
That's
right.
At
that time. Now, your parents got divorced.
Yes.
How old were you when your parents divorced?
I was about 2 years old.
So you don't even remember living with?
No, not when they were living together.
Bill, your brother, was how many years older than you?
He was 2 years older than me. So he remembered a little of that.
But not much.
But not much.
You know, that was a very unusual thing to happen at that time.
That's right.
People to get divorced.
And especially since the fact my mother was Catholic.
Mm.
And she was, what would you call it, excommunicated from the church.
Wow.
When she was divorced.
And did you ever know what caused the divorce? Was that something
Never knew.
Never thought about it?
Nope. I suspect my brother knew, but I didn't. And no one ever volunteered as to why the divorce came about.
Did you ever wonder?
Not much. It was one of those compatible divorces where my mother never said a bad thing about my father, and my father never said a bad thing about my mother.
In other words, you lived with your mother some of the time and your father some of the time.
And my grandparents.
And your grandparents.
Yeah.
Whose parents were those?
My mother's.
Okay. Those were the ones that was...
Laporte's.
You used to call him Lafitte Laporte, but that wasn't his name.
Lafitte.
But what was his name?
His name was Lambert.
Lambert Laporte.
Lambert Laporte, an old Frenchman.
And he he had the farm in West Branch that you talked so fondly about.
Yes.
Now, did you live most of the time with your mother? Or most of the time with your father? Or how did they work that out?
My mother finally remarried. I lived with my grandparents for, I think, we were there about 3 years. And then my mother remarried, and then we lived with her. And all of the time I lived with my grandparents, we saw maybe as much of my father as we did my mother, because she was working in Toledo, and she worked in Flint, Michigan.
What did she do?
She did many things. She modeled hats early in her life. She worked for a politician in Toledo, the mayor of the city, and she was involved in some of the political things there. Finally, she worked for General Motors in Flint.
So then she got remarried about 3 years after they got divorced. So you're about 5 years old at this point.
That's about right.
And
I had just started the little country school that was located in West Branch near my grandparents.
Okay.
In fact, it was called the Laporte School.
Wow. And then they got married.
Yeah.
And then you moved in with them.
In with Flint.
Both you and Bill.
Yeah.
In Flint.
Right.
Did they have a farm? What kind of a place did they have?
In Flint?
Yes.
In Flint, we had 33 acres, a little farm. My stepfather was a graduate from the University of Minnesota. Frank had a degree in agriculture, and he followed all of the correct farming practices and really grew some weird stuff occasionally.
So tell me about your childhood.
I spent the school years in Flint, and most of the summers until we got a little older, we spent in West Branch with my grandparents and my father.
Because your father stayed in West Branch.
He was a barber. He had a barber shop. In fact, his whole family were barbers and beauticians.
And wasn't he also, didn't he become like a fairly prominent person in West Branch, or?
Well, as prominent as you could get in West Branch, I guess, which was not all that prominent. Financially, he was very average. He did become a justice of the peace.
Mm.
And
that's what I was thinking.
He was a Mason. He was just a good man.
But nothing.
Nothing really exceptional. He was a good father and a good person. He was well liked and well respected in West Branch.
But your grandfather's, Grandma's father.
Yeah.
He's the one that you really adored.
Yeah, that's a little different story.
Yeah?
Lambert was a farmer. He was kind of a Renaissance man. He was ahead of his times. He followed all of the bulletins from Michigan State, at that time, college,
Mm-hmm.
and farmed, rotating his crops. He made a profit farming. And also, he was quite a sportsman. He was a hunter, and he was really a world-class fisherman. During the winter, when things on the farm slowed down, he had people come in, and they would come up for a week or 2 weeks to hunt or to fish. And he would guide them. He also trained hunting dogs.
Was he the one who fostered your love of fishing? I mean, fishing is, would you say that fishing is the passion, one of the passions of your life? I would.
Well, everybody tells me that.
Well, you tell me.
I guess it is, yeah. I've gone through life fishing everywhere there is to fish, I guess, and catching every kind of fish that's out there, practically.
And what got that started?
I think Lambert. He taught me how to hunt. He taught me how to fish. He taught me what a true sportsman should be. And he taught me the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things.
Would you say that your summers were sort of idyllic, living on the farm? And
in a sense they were, but in another sense we also worked.
Mm-hmm.
We helped bring in the hay. I've shoveled my share of manure and milked cows and did all of the things you do on a farm.
Well, you did the same thing in Flint, though, right? During the school year?
Yeah, but Flint, the farming was more of a sideline.
Hmm.
My mother and father, when I moved to Flint, both took jobs at the AC spark plug, which was part of General Motors at that time.
And when did your mother open the bakery? She opened a bakery at some point, right?
That was yeah. That was in the 40s, right after World War II.
After the war broke out.
After the war broke out, there was a bakery in Flint called Schramm's Bakery, which baked cookies, and it was run by a gentleman named Eros Schramm, who had 2 sons. The 2 sons were drafted into the army, so he couldn't run the bakery. And I don't know how my mother got in touch with him, but she did, and she leased the bakery from Mr. Schramm. And she and her cousin went in partnership and reopened the bakery.
How long did they keep it open?
About 4 years.
This was when you were a teenager.
That's when I was a teenager. So during those years, I did not go to West Branch. during the summer.
You worked in the bakery.
Worked in the bakery.
So you grew up during the Depression.
Right. Well, yeah, but I really don't recall that much about Depression years. I remember hearing things like the WPA and the PWA and some of those things, but my memories of that sort of thing are pretty dim.
As far as you were concerned, there was no Depression. You didn't even know what a Depression was, I bet.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. It's probably true. The only Depression I knew is when I was with my grandparents and they told me about the other farmers who, I can't use that language that Lambert used, but they went on welfare and they couldn't make it and they should have done this and they should have done that. He was very judgmental about other people's farming practices.
So I understand you got in a good bit of your share of trouble as you were growing up. Is this correct?
Which, well, I mean, I can go in any direction you want to go on that.
Take it away.
I had a few times.
Well,
nothing really serious. No brushes with the law, nothing in jail or anything like that.
Well, tell me a couple stories.
Well, let's see. Well, there was a time some of the neighbor kids and I decided to go into a house during the winter. We were sledding at a house owned by a family called Hamady. They owned big grocery stores in Flint. And there was a basement window that was convenient to get into, so we just, sledding down there one day, decided to go in the house. And we did. I actually was quite innocent. I went in and looked around and thought it was really nice. Never seen a house that well furnished and well equipped. One of the group evidently did take a few things. And also one of the group, a little girl, one of the little neighbor girls, told her mother and father that we went in that house. And anyway, it evolved where the police got involved. The police contacted my parents, and my parents told me the police would be over to talk to me. Scared me to death.
How old were you?
I was about, I guess 11, maybe 11 years old.
So you broke into somebody's house at age 11 with some
I didn't break in.
fellow
I just
thugs.
went in.
You just went in.
Yeah, and some things got disturbed in the house that I didn't do. Not my fault. But anyway, I'm not sure whatever happened. The police never showed up. But boy, I lived in fear for about 3 weeks. Every time a police car went by, I'm going in hiding somewhere.
Did it keep you from misbehaving ever again?
No.
Tell me something else. Some other incident that might have occurred.
Andy, I was not I consider myself now quite an honest person. I would never cheat anybody out of anything. And when I was real small, I was that way. But as I became a teenager, maybe I needed more excitement in my life. I don't know. But when we started driving our old car that we got, we needed...
At what age?
That was about 14, 13 or 14. We occasionally needed equipment for the car. And there are instances, I must admit, when we borrowed that equipment from other cars in parking lots. We did things like that. I didn't, I really didn't do all that many dishonest things. I mean, the things I did were dumb things.
Like what?
Well, like we got a Model T Ford when I got old enough to drive, about 12. And it was a pretty nice looking old Model T Ford. We immediately cut the top off with a chisel and a hammer and threw it away. The day we cut the top off, we decided to go for a ride in it, in our new convertible. Well, 4 of us got in a car with 2 seats, and 2 of the boys were sitting in the back, up on top, where the top used to be.
Yes.
And 2 of us were in the driver's seat and the passenger seat. Went around the corner. One boy that wasn't holding on very well, he got thrown off the car. Where the metal was cut to remove the roof had a sharp edge, which fortunately didn't catch him, but it did catch his pants. Threw it off, ripped his pants all practically off his body. He said bad things.
Do I remember hearing a story about involving an outhouse?
Yeah. That was in the later years when I was about 15. Halloween came one year during this period of time. And I decided I wanted to get this buddy of mine and I to go out, and kids in those days went out and did strange things like tip over outhouses and so forth. And I decided that sounds like a good idea. Well, I couldn't talk my buddy into doing it, so I said, "The heck with you, I'm doing it myself." So I got my rope and rode over about 11 o'clock at night to my neighbor's house and
On
threw
the
a
horse?
rope
On the horse?
on a horse.
Okay.
Threw a rope around the outhouse, and we pulled that son of a gun over. Well, he heard it. And he came out, and I didn't have time to get my rope back. So I took off on the horse, and this man was not dumb. He knew who tipped over his outhouse. So the next day, he came over, and my folks were enlightened as to my activities that previous night. Anyway, I had to go back over to his house later and help him right the outhouse, and I had to paint that thing inside and out. And I learned my lesson.
But did you learn your lesson?
No, probably not. But anyway, he and I became friends. I mean, I worked for him enough so that he was a nice man.
Did you get kicked out of school a few times?
Oh, well, there were a time or two. When I had a car, it was easy to skip school. And occasionally they'd have a good movie down in Flint. So anyway, I would decide I'd rather go to a movie than go to school, so I'd gather up a couple buddies and we'd take off to go to Flint to the movie. One time I did that, and I'm just walking out of the movie with my 2 buddies, and the principal of the school is coming down the street, walking down, or down the sidewalk, walking down there. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, "Hello, Bobby." And I said, "Mr. Nichols." Anyway, he said, "Probably you better see me in my office tomorrow morning." So I went in his office and the next day, and he said, "Well, go home. You have a way to get home?" And I said, "Well, I can walk." "Okay, will you do that?" He said, "Go home and have one of your parents bring you back." So that was a kick out. And yeah, I got in trouble a little bit in school. Another time I was in the chemistry lab, mixed 2 chemicals, made hydrogen, lit a match, and blew the fluorescent light out in the chemistry lab.
Were you close to your brother?
Mostly, yeah. We were not really super close, but we got along well together. And I guess maybe what I could say about Bill, what I didn't know about getting in trouble, he could teach me. He was not a matter of his being, he was just older and he was able to do things that were okay, but were not okay for a younger kid to do. Taught me to smoke at an early age. He and I used to work on cars, tear down engines, and we did all kinds of crazy things.
Hedwig Bonowitz.
Hedwig was a beautiful, long-haired, blonde girl, Polish girl. Lived not too far from me, and that was during the period of time when we had all the horses, and I was riding practically every day. I'd always run a ride past Hedwig's house in hopes she would be out there and I could stop and see her. Well, this went on quite often, and also I would ride the school bus to school. I'd always try to sit next to Hedwig.
How old were you at this time?
I was probably 14, 15, about 15, I guess. And one day I'm riding by there and Hedwig is out in the yard and she waves at me. And I said, well, gee. So I rode in the driveway and she came over and she's petting the horse. I had my horse Ginger. She's petting my horse and we're talking a little bit. I'm pretty shy, don't know how to approach this beautiful person. Anyway, she's complimenting the horse. And I say, well, do you want to ride? You want to ride him? And she said, oh yeah, I'd love to, you know. So I said, okay. So I got off the horse and helped her get on the horse. And I'm leading Ginger around and Ginger gave his head a shake and I lost the rein. And Ginger, being a good home-going horse, decided that's exactly what he's going to do. And Ginger takes off for home, Hedwig holding onto the saddle horn. Yeah, Bob! Anyway, the horse took her all the way home. She came riding in our house, evidently, and my mother saw her. And by that time, she was scared to death and crying and everything else. Well, anyway, that kind of ended my relationship with Hedwig. My mother had to take her back to her house. And I was walking home by that time. In fact, I was walking home and she passed me. Hedwig did not wave at me. And then my mother told me later, she said, she's not very happy with you.
Do you have a worst memory of your childhood?
Probably, not really, but probably the worst memory would be when my mother became really ill. And I remember I was in the 10th grade. And was it 10th or 10th grade? She became ill and had to go to the hospital and almost died. She had encephalitis, which was unheard of in the northern states at that time. She became deaf. She became blind. She had these terrific headaches and was in the hospital. Fortunately, had a doctor. Nobody knew it was wrong because nobody was familiar with that disease. No one knew it was wrong. And this doctor said, well, his name was Rundles, Dr. Rundles. He said, the only thing I can think of to do, he said, I know there's pressure on her brain and that's what's happening. And he said, if we don't relieve the pressure, she'll die. If we do relieve the pressure, she might die anyway. But the only hope that I can give is taking spinal taps and getting some of that fluid off her brain. So he did that. And really saved her life. And that probably, I guess that would have been the low point.
I would say so.
Yeah. But she recovered and never fully recovered. There was a lot of residual damage. She drove a car after that. In fact, it was after that time that she got the bakery. Even with that, she had balance problems. She had headaches, just driving headaches.
Yeah.
But she got the bakery and made it go.
She was tough.
She was a tough lady. She really was.
Now, you have achieved a lot of stuff in your life.
Early on, I had an uncle who was a doctor in Bay City, Michigan. He's an X-ray specialist. And
Larry Ziliak.
Larry Ziliak, his name was. And Larry decided that I ought to go to the University of Michigan when I finished high school and become a doctor, and that he would actually spring for a lot of the expense of my doing that. So that word got around to my mother and my father and everybody, and then that expectation was there. Well, when you know, some kids, when they finish high school, well, I'll go to the Buick and go to work, or I'll do this, or I don't know what I'll do. They kind of let me know early on that they wanted me to go to college. So I did. And I graduated from high school, and before I got drafted into the Army, I went to the University of Michigan for 1 semester, which was a waste of everybody's money and my time, I'm sure, because I, again, was not a student who was there who wanted to accomplish. I kind of majored in student nurses and pinochle. I didn't have a strong enough will to disobey that expectation.
To disappoint your parents, or to...
Probably to disappoint them, yeah. That was part of it.
So, how old were you when you were drafted?
18.
And what year was this?
The beginning of 1946.
Okay, so the fighting part of the war was over.
That's right.
Although officially the war had not yet ended.
War was going on, but I did not see any of the combat stuff.
So you trained and then went to the Philippines.
Trained in Alabama, in Fort Jackson in Alabama, and was sent to the Philippines, right? Mindanao and also Manila.
So you were really going overseas when the vast majority, the bulk of those millions of guys were coming home.
They were coming back, yeah, mostly from Europe. They were coming back, and they were still going over as far as the Asian stuff was concerned. And when I got in the Philippines, we had a lot of Japanese prisoners who were still there and so forth, but the Philippines was pretty secure when I got over there.
It was occupied.
Yeah.
And what was your job?
Actually, I was an anti-aircraft gunner. I was trained for that, but they didn't need one when I got overseas, and the company commander called me in one day and said, I would like to have you. He said, I've been looking over your record, and he said, I see you're a baker. And I said, sir? He said, yeah. He said, I see during this period of time that you worked in a bakery. And I tried to explain to him that my work in the bakery was not learning how to bake anything. It was simply putting cookies in an oven, let them cook and taking them out. But he said, well, that's good enough. He said, that's more experience than anybody else has here. So I became a company baker, which was probably the most dangerous job in the Army, the way I bake stuff. They used my biscuits for ammunition. But anyway, I learned how to be the company baker.
So this is why, when we were all growing up, you could not make just one pie. You'd
That's
make
it.
like 4 pies.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I went from company baker to second cook to first cook to mess sergeant. So I went through the whole...
Climbed right up the ranks of
Well,
the kitchen.
That's because our outfit in the Philippines, as I was moving through that sequence, broke up, was sent back. But I had more time to spend overseas. So I was assigned to a military police outfit. Hated military police.
Why?
And when you're in the Army, you're supposed to hate military police at that time. Anyway, did not want to be in the military police. And they tried to give me assignments, and I said, I'm not qualified for that. I'm a cook. And the closest I ever came to doing anything like that, I was one time assigned on a prisoner chasing detail, where military prisoners, you took them out and put them to work somewhere, and you sat there with a gun and watched them.
Yeah.
Well, I was so afraid that mine were going to escape that I would just take them out and sit them down by a tree or in the shade or whatever, and sit there and watch them. Say, you guys read or do what you want to do. But anyway, I found out that the mess sergeant in that MP outfit was 738th MP. Found out that the mess sergeant was a lower rank than I was. So I went into the company commander and insisted that I take his job, and he was about ready to go back to the States anyway, so I became mess sergeant in the MPs.
Do I recall you telling a story about commandeering a fishing boat?
Yeah, that was one of the things we did over there. That kind of was my introduction into saltwater fishing. We, 5 of us from the mess hall, commandeered a boat that belonged to a Filipino doctor, and with his, how do I want to say that, forced permission, or encouraged him to let us take his boat and crew, spent a week fishing in the Philippines. On the fishing trip, we did about as much drinking as fishing, but I did get to see various islands in the China Sea. I caught fish, almost lost a finger. First saltwater fish I ever hooked.
What was your best memory from the military?
Best memory? I'm not sure. Going home.
That's a good one. That's
I enjoyed the military. A lot of good memories, a lot of bad memories. Well, maybe the best one, we had what they call an R&R, our week up in the mountains of the Philippines. That was fun. Was at Furlough up there, where they had a golf course and a whole lot of good stuff to do.
When you came back from the Philippines and got out of the Army, would you say you were a different person?
Yeah, probably.
Better
yeah.
or worse?
Little more mature. Maybe the difference was when I left for the Army, the college experience, for example. Everybody in my family was determined I was going to be a doctor. And at that age, In that period of my life, I was not strong enough to fight that.
Mm.
And I really did not want to become a doctor. And when I got out of the military, I no longer was under that influence. I was going to do what I wanted to do. And being a doctor was not one of them. So in that way, it really changed my life. I could have gone right on and gone through medical school and probably made it because my uncle had a lot of influence there, and really could have killed a lot of people because I would not have been a good doctor.
So did you go back to school then when you got back?
Yeah, when I got back, I went to work for Bell Telephone, and I worked there for a year. And Bell Telephone was a good company to work for at that time. Bell every year would send questionnaires to their employees and say, in Bell we have a variety of work responsibilities. What is your goal? What would you like to do? Anyway, I knew enough about the workings of Bell Telephone, so I put down the highest paid job and said that's what I would like to learn. And I'm a son of a gun. About the time I decided to go back to college, my notice came from Bell Telephone. They had assigned me to toll test, which was exactly what I had asked for. So then I had a decision to make. Do I want to go back to college, or do I want to have a career with Bell Telephone? Well, I decided to go back to college, had the GI Bill to pay for it and so forth. So anyway, I went back to school. That's where I met your mother. Best thing it ever did.
Tell me about that.
My brother, when he was in the Navy, and in the Navy, he learned to play bridge, and he was a good bridge player. He was pro-class bridge player. He taught me how. I started to school in Flint Junior College. They had a bridge club, and they were looking for people to go to the bridge club, so I went to the bridge club, and they decided that I could help teach the students who were coming in to learn to play bridge and form the bridge club. So I did. That's where I met your mother.
She was a student?
She came in to learn how to play bridge. And she had the loudest laugh of the group, and that's kind of what attracted me to her. So from that time on, I was going to school.
What got you into the career of deaf education?
I finished Flint Junior College, and I had that other semester at the University of Michigan, and I was running out of GI Bill, and I was running out of money, and they had a program in Flint at the School for the Deaf where you could get 2 years college credit in education, and I went over, talked to the people, decided if I'm going to finish school, this probably is the way I got to do it. So I did. I had so many part-time jobs that I can't even remember them all. I worked in a lumber camp one year. Darn near killed me. Skinny kid like me at that time. I worked in a shoe store and got fired.
Why?
A lady brought her little, this was a kind of an army surplus like store, and the shoes, the shoes in that store were, I swear, they'd fall apart when you'd pick them up to look at them. And this lady was in there with her little kid, and she's going to buy him shoes, and I said, there's a place next door that has much better shoes. Which is not the right thing to say when your boss is 2 counters away listening. So, yeah, things like that. I made ice cream for a while there was an outfit in Flint called Bouquet Ice Cream Company. And they manufactured their own ice cream. Well, I was the manufacturer. So did that sort of thing. I gave driver training lessons to old widowed ladies who had lost their husbands mostly. Did all kinds of crazy stuff like that.
And so, once you graduated, you had a job waiting for you.
Yeah. In fact, I started teaching before I ever got my degree. When I was teaching, I was also driving back and forth between Flint and Eastern Michigan University at Ypsilanti, taking classes at night.
So, how long had you been working at MSD before you got your degree?
Let's see, 2 years.
Okay.
2 years when I finished up.
And then the master's degree came
Much later. I taught for 13 years at MSD and took the amount of graduate classes to be recertified as a teacher and took a couple extras, and then was called in and offered the position of dean at the school. Only a master's degree was required. By that time, I think I had eight hours left to take, and I really, up until that point, I didn't care whether I got a master's degree or not. I was not a gung-ho student.
There's a theme. There's a repeating theme here, I see.
Yeah, well, I think some people are overeducated.
Yeah.
Anyway, when I was offered that position, then I went back to Ypsilanti during the summer and finished up my master's coursework.
If I remember this right, you got some counselor training.
Yeah.
And
well, I got some of that on my graduate, when I finished my graduate work too.
But at some point, you tried some of that counseling on
you,
on your mother, on my mother, on your wife, and it didn't work out so well. Is that right?
Well, yeah. A good counselor will say to his patient or his client, so you tell me that you had problems with your father when you were growing up. Tell me about it. And you say, yeah, he was really mean to me when I did this or so forth. And I'd say, you say he was really, well, I tried that with your mother. Didn't work. Don't pull that stuff on me, she'd tell me. So I'd back off. But that's interesting years, because during that time I was also taking all of these testing courses. And you were growing up and your brother was growing up, and I'd give you guys personality tests and IQ tests, and Gary and Luann, your two cousins, they were growing up and I gave them tests. Boy, I'll tell you, I had a bunch of really screwed up kids. If I went by my test results. So those were fun years.
So was it difficult for you to juggle raising kids, having the career, doing the work?
I don't know how we did it. You had to have a good wife, I'll tell you that, and your mother really shouldered a lot of the responsibility. In fact, One of the courses I took was a correspondence course, and she did it. And I got the credit for it. And the only difficulty in that was I had to take the test at the end of the course, and did pretty well on it too.
Who was the most difficult child?
Paul got into more stuff, like breaking his arm, and some kid dared him to ride off a cliff with his bike, and he said, "I'll do it," and he did it, and broke his arm. I remember the time when he was standing on the dock looking at you, who had fallen off the dock and was underwater blowing bubbles. And fortunately, your mother looked out the window and
I
pulled you
hadn't
out.
fallen off the dock. I was pushed. I just want to set this record straight.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure how you got there. I think we got you both in. I gave you a hick for getting in the water. No, but you guys we had good kids.
And as much fighting, I think, as we did, we seemed to all get along well.
Yeah. I don't think you did that much fighting. I mean, you did,
Yeah.
boys, brothers especially will
Right.
fight.
Was there an easiest kid?
Probably Nancy.
Why?
Well, because you guys, by that time, we knew what we were doing, maybe.
Maybe by that time you just weren't paying attention.
Well, that may be true, too. The things that used to bother us before her no longer bother us. You used to bother me a little.
How's that?
Well, usually you'd get in trouble with Paul because when Paul was going to school, you were not going to school yet. And Paul would be doing his assignment, and you'd be looking over his shoulder. And I recall times when he'd be stumbling on a word, and you'd tell him what the word was. And you hadn't even been to school yet, which made him mad. And then you guys would get into it. But anyway, that's all that kind of stuff that kids do.
Tell me about your relationship with my mother.
We had a great marriage. 53 years worth, excuse me. And I think we shared the responsibilities of marriage pretty well. Your mother had a lot more common sense than I did. I think she had more patience. People used to say to me, "Boy, you must really have a lot of patience working with deaf kids." Well, maybe I wore it all out on the deaf kids because I didn't have that much patience with you guys sometimes. But I think we pretty much knew and respected the boundaries of what we should be in charge of. And I also think we never got into the kind of things where we insulted each other and said really mean, bad things to each other. And we trusted each other.
What are some lessons, some life lessons that you've learned? I mean, you've said many times to me that you've had a good life. You don't have any regrets.
Not a one.
What are some of the lessons that you've learned that if your grandson or granddaughter were sitting here right now, you would tell them?
Well, I think what I would tell them is get in your mind what you want to do or you want to be and know you can do it. I think there are too many people who dwell on, gee, I'd like to do this, but. Get rid of the buts, I think.
But
See, there's a but.
I hear what you're saying. I think it makes sense. Your life did not necessarily follow that path, in that you had a very successful career in deaf education. You just fell into it.
I don't think you fall into it.
Tell me, what do you mean?
No, I think I knew I was going to finish college. I didn't know whether it was going to be in deaf education or whether it was going to be what. I knew it wasn't going to be medicine. But I knew I was going to finish college one way or another. Not, gee, I hope I can finish college, or I'd like to, or maybe I can. I knew I was going to do that. When I got into teaching, I taught for 13 years. Started teaching second grade, ended up teaching college prep courses at MSD. I was never, maybe it's not being completely satisfied with what you're doing. I think that's part of I used to actually envy some of the teachers I knew. All they wanted to do was be teachers. Now, I don't say that in a way that's putting down teachers. Tremendous responsibility and a heck of a job. But I always thought there's something more I ought to be doing. And then when I was offered the position of dean up there, I thought, that's great. And that wasn't an end in itself. I thought there's something more than this. And fortunately for me, I guess, I was kind of pushed into a career change because the school up there was going in a direction I could not support. That thread ran through my whole life. There's always something I haven't done that I'd like to try to do. Always with the thought, and this is really unrealistic, I'll grant you, I can do that, you know. Anybody can do that. Well, maybe you can and maybe you can't. But if you say I can't do that, you'll never try it. And
if you say you can't, then you're right.
That's right. So you can't, you can't.
You're always looking for the next thing. What's the next thing now?
I'll tell you, there's a fish up there in the St. Mary's River that ain't been caught. And boy, he's a big one. And that's left. I got to get that one. And maybe I'm at a point in life where I just enjoy watching the success that my kids have. I do a lot of bragging about you and Nancy and Jill and Paul. So maybe I am simply feeding off the success of my children.
And when you say success, you're talking, I assume, not just in terms of careers and that sort of thing.
I'm talking about satisfaction with what they're doing and who they are, and the honesty that they show in all of the things that they do. Success is a lot more than just a career. I think there are too many people that give up on things before they ever give it a chance. And I've always thought you attract to you what you give out. And hopefully, except for my younger years, I think I've lived my life pretty much that way. And I think as you get older, you do become a better person if you're lucky. I think I'm probably a nicer person now than I was when I was 30 years old or 40 years old. Maybe not that much nicer, but a little bit nicer. I see things now much clearer in a sense than 30 years ago or 40 years ago. God, if you haven't learned something by the time you're in your 80s, you know, what have you been doing all your life? And my favorite things are still fishing. Even though I physically can't do the things I used to with the boats and the scuba diving and so forth, I still enjoy seeing other people partake in those things and that sort of thing. As far as my life is concerned, I really feel blessed with a lot of good stuff. And I can't think of any part of my life I would want to get rid of. You know, wipe out of my memory. I've been blessed with 2 wonderful marriages and wouldn't do that any differently.
If you had it to do over again?
I can't think of any way I'd change it. Maybe I'd buy a bigger boat.